Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our Gimmal education session. We're here to explore ways to enhance your expertise with your Gimmal software. Jeff, you could go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. So my name is Marcia Shields and I'm from our customer success team. I'll be your host, and joining us today is Jeff Tuish. Jeff is our sales engineer and our subject matter expert for today's session. We're happy to have you with us, whether you're joining us live or watching this recording later. Today's session is going to be reviewing Gimmal Discover and how it can be helpful to get your data ready for AI. Pardon me. A few housekeeping things before we get going. As a reminder, this session is about 30 minutes, which will include time at the end for your questions. And we do encourage your questions. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom bar at the Q&A area, we encourage you to post those there. I'll be monitoring that section and we'll tee those up for Jeff after his presentation. As a reminder, we are recording the session. It will be shared via email and also posted to our Gimmal YouTube channel. Next slide, Jeff. Before we really get going, our Gimmal All-Star program is going really well. We'd like to congratulate a few new All-Stars since our last session. So congratulations to Alexia, James, Peter, and Amanda. Everybody that joins our session live, register for a session, or partakes in our survey, or earns points towards your Gimmal All-Star badge. Let's see. The next thing I'd like to do before we go, I'm going to launch a quick poll question, obviously relative to today's subject that Jeff's going to be talking about. The question is, how prepared is your organization for integrating AI into records management? I'll leave this up for a bit as more people roll in and let you guys know what the answers are later. But Jeff, I think that's it for me, so I'm going to hand things off to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcia.
You bet.
And let me see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. All right. Let me close this out. Perfect. All right, guys. So what we're going to be talking about today is how we can use Gimmal Discover for AI readiness. And what does that mean? So what we're talking about is, as I'm sure everybody has heard, with AI, it is a very powerful mechanism. However, you want to make sure that it's only learning from the proper data. So we're going to be talking about how we can go through and do the readiness steps to make sure that that is the case. So what that means is that we don't want it to be learning from things that are sensitive, proprietary, what have you. We want it to learn from the data that you want to share with it. So what we want to help you with is to be able to identify that data, either isolate it, categorize it, classify it, whatever it might be, to be able to give you some insight. So when it comes time for AI, you're ready for it. So what do we have first? So you'll see the readiness steps. And the first one, this is a hard one, quite honestly. A lot of times when we come into environments and we perform any kind of, like we're doing the rot remediation, which we're doing quite a bit of those right now, is we'll ask people, so what data do you have out on your file shares, for instance? I make this very file share focused, but keep in mind, this could also be for SharePoint and OneDrive and email. So don't think that this is only for Windows file shares. I just had to pick a data source and that's the one I went with. So we ask people, it's like, what's in your data in your file shares? Well, I know we have some contract information. We probably have some HR stuff, but they really don't have a full idea of what's there. So identifying that data is key. And I'll be talking about how we can use Gimmal Discover to be able to help you with that. And then how do we go through and we want to inventory? We want to see, okay, now that we understand what kind of data we have, let's talk about volumes of all that. So how do I go through and perform all this categorization to be able to inventory the data properly to make sure that AI is only learning from things that I wanted to learn from? Next, the inclusion or exclusion. You're probably going, what does that mean? What do I mean by that is you can make decisions on how do you want to go through and make sure that AI is learning from the proper stuff? Do you want to provide it only with the things you want it to learn from? Or do you want to take the opposite stance and say, I know what I need to exclude and everything else is fair game for it? So that's what that's all about, is that inclusion or exclusion. And then going last to the methodology, how will you prevent or allow that inclusion or exclusion? What steps will you take to make sure that you've done through all this work to make sure that all that work comes to fruition for you. So moving to the next slide. All right, so identification. Just giving you some ideas of some different categories on things and what might fall into that. So now some people could argue, well, you know, confidential, trade secrets are privileged. So I'm not trying to draw dark lines here on these different categories, just trying to make you think about what kind of data is sitting out there. So you see the confidential type of data. I'm sure that all of you could contribute many other very valid things to this list. I just wanted to be able to identify some of this. So we have the contracts, obviously. If you want to have your contracts being able to go out and be included or excluded from AI. Anything human resources, most likely, that will be an exclusion. Your invoices, anything legal. So all of that kind of information, which legal falls into the privileged, attorney-client things, doctor-patient things, depending on what you have. Then we get into the personal data. Do you want to compromise, obviously, any of your users and or clients with their information? So probably not. So that's things to also consider as well, of things I do not want to be consumed by AI. And lastly, getting down into proprietary, into depending on what industry you're in, your formulas, your designs, your processes, whatever else might be proprietary in that whole process, to make sure that that also is not being fed into AI. So going through and doing the inventory. I mean, you have some things you could do manually. It'd be a lot of work. I mean, we're working with a company right now that has petabytes worth of data. So going through that manually and performing an inventory on that is a very difficult thing to do, obviously, and probably would be, quite honestly, inaccurate at some point. But you do have the data owners, the people that hopefully, if we're talking Windows file sharers again, hopefully would have some insight as to what kind of data is sitting out there in their particular folders. The same with the departments, being able to go through and use their knowledge to help you identify this kind of data. But then we get into the kind of data that we can use some automation for. We have the metadata, and that's where the automation part comes in. So metadata being like the file name, the dates, the folder it's in, what have you. Obviously, the metadata is going to change. If we were in SharePoint sites, it'd be what library. If we were in email, it'd be what mailbox. So obviously, that metadata is going to change depending on the data source. But to be able to interrogate that metadata and make those kind of decisions. So what we're saying here is with Gimmal Discover is we're going to define what you're searching for. And what that means is that we have some options with that. So with the metadata, depending on what kind of metadata it is, numeric versus date time versus textual, then you have a lot of different operators that you can do. So this gives you the opportunity to be able to say, okay, I need to make sure that content-wise, that I am not including things that are, once again, privileged, proprietary, whatever categories would be excluded from AI. So we're giving you a lot of different operators that you could do. A lot of these are opposites, as you see going down through here, but just to give you some idea of being able to identify that data. And then we get in down to the searching, actually being able to search the data. So with Gimmal Discover, we can search through about 220 plus different types of extensions, looking for keywords, phrases, expressions. And when I say expressions, I mean building expressions that have ands and ors and nots and parentheses, exclude, proximity, all those kind of things available to you to be able to make a fully qualified Boolean search expression that helps you identify that data. And then lastly, getting into regex, also known as regular expressions. And that's what's typically used to be able to go out and find pattern matches on data. So identifying social security numbers, social insurance numbers, national identification numbers, credit cards, whatever kind of data, once again, maybe PHI for any health information that you'd want to exclude from this process. So how do we do the methodology, the inclusion or exclusion? Well, you have a couple of choices. Typically, I like catering to the exception, not the rule, if you can, because it's going to be a smaller set of data, one would hope, right? So which one do you want? You can do, obviously, the easier, the better, but with more automation, but we need to be safe about this. We need to make sure that we're not including data that you don't want AI to consume. So once we are going through, we've done our identification, we've done our inventory, and now we're saying, okay, but I've done that, but I need to be able to make decisions on looking at the data from this point forward and knowing what I want to do with it. So you have some choices. And all these choices, you're going to see here that we have some options in here. First one is labeling. So one of the things that Gimmal Discover can do within the classification module, it is a very focused functionality. Its job is to take the criteria that you provide and then apply the label that you provide. So they go through and using the metadata, most likely the content, and be able to say, this is a contract, this is an invoice, this is privileged, this is proprietary. You can make up whatever labels you want, as few or as many as you like, and then using your criteria to make sure that all that appropriate data gets labeled. Now, one of the things I like to recommend first is we can actually perform a simulation of that labeling, because no offense meant, but probably your first pass on your labeling criteria is not going to be complete. You might think it is, but you're going to find either false positives and things that are getting labeled that shouldn't. And more importantly, you might be excluding things that are true positives of that process. So going through and performing a simulation iteratively on the labeling, what I recommend is you go after a small subset of data, something that you know that you don't want AI to ingest everything. And we want to nominate that. We create a criteria, and it'd be a great idea to already know what's in there to make sure that you have some comfortability in the process, actually finding the things it's supposed to find and ignoring the things that you know are not anything that you don't want AI to get. It's fair game for AI. So going through that labeling process is key. And then once you feel comfortable, then we can go apply a label to the file. What that's actually doing, it's updating the file itself. That label is going to persist. If that file gets moved, that label is going with it. It's in actually what we call the alternate data stream. It's a location that we're able to put in our own content in there, which is basically additional metadata. And then using Gimmal Discover, we can go through and say, okay, I've gone through the steps of labeling everything. Now when it comes time to say, what do I want to allow AI to have? I can use that label. So instead of having to crack that file open again, we've already put a label on it. We know what's within it. Now we can include or exclude that data based upon the label. That's what the classification, the second bullet, is doing for us. It's going through and doing all that process. We could also apply some per-view sensitivity labels. And they're actually now Copilot has labels that we can go out and apply to the Windows file shares, so that once, say, that data gets moved into SharePoint, which a lot of people are transferring file shares to SharePoint, then once that's done, those sensitivity labels will already be updated. And now Copilot is going to have the intelligence to know, hey, should I include this within AI processing? So you're basically arming Copilot with the necessary information for when you're in SharePoint to allow Copilot to make those decisions when it comes time for that AI ingestion. And the isolation, what I mean by that is, it sounds a little cruel actually when I think about it, but maybe I should use a different word. But isolation means if we go through and once again, we're in a Windows file share and you've got all sorts of data sitting out there, maybe what you want to do is you want to copy or move that data from its original location into a different place, and that's where AI will ingest. So that's what we're talking about isolating. So taking the data that you either want to protect and move it out of there and allow AI to process the original source, or you move the data into another location that is the data you want AI to ingest. So you got your choices on all that. So it gives you an idea of, once again, this sort of is catering to the exception. If you've got 100 terabytes of data sitting out there and only 1 terabyte is data that you don't want AI to have anything to do with, it'd probably be a good idea to move that data somewhere else. So cater to the smaller set just for expedition, so it's faster in the process. So that's what I wanted to talk about with this. But now what I want to do is I'm going to go in, I'm going to show you some Power BI. So we're going to show you, we're going to do some things here. And I'm going to open up, the first one is our classification. So one of the things we've done with our Gimmal Discover product is once those labels have been applied, the classification labels, we can give you some visualization of that. So let's say that these are the labels that I said, well, these are the ones I want, and none of this data do I want AI to ingest? Well, now I can get some insight. I mean, I've gone through and applied the labels, but now I want to be able to visualize what the heck I did as far as the amount of data, what have you. So what we're showing you here is the ability to ingest some exported CSV files out of Discover and be able to show that data in a nice, reasonable way. So you see, get an insight of the different classification labels, get some idea about the extensions that were found, and then we get into some of the charts here, give you an idea, okay, well, I want to know overall, how much percentage of data? Well, 74.8 was not classified. So maybe this is the data that AI is going to be able to ingest. And then to the right of it is a chart that shows only the labeled data, just to give you an idea of what is taking up most of the size out there in this. And then down here with the extensions, just give you some insight on all that data as well. So that just gives you an idea, once you do this classification, to be able to have a nice visualization summary base to give you an idea of, okay, I applied all these labels. I just want to know what that volume was and also break it down per each one of those labels. What we can also do is go through and using keywords or phrases, whatever you want, be able to use that information possibly to help you. So what this report is doing is saying, I went out and I looked for particular keywords or phrases, and I wanted to know the volume of that. So this could just be simply performing a simulation on this. We're not labeling anything. I just want to take advantage of the power that Gimmal Discover has, being able to crack open a file and look at its contents and to say, hey, these are the keywords that I'm finding. So these are the things that are of value to me. So once again, I know what my data is that I have out there. And just like we had for the classification, doing the same thing for this, what percentage of keyword matches that I have for the various data? And once again, by extension, which extensions were the most populated with that? And then lastly, the other kind of thing that we consider something you probably do not want to have included within AI is anything that's PII, personal identifiable information. And just give you some idea, not to be preaching the topic here, but basically PII, you're going to see blood type on here. I have other ones that are ethnicity and gender, religion, what have you. Those are called indirect PII. Those are things that a grouping of people would be identified by that, as opposed to something that is a direct PII, like a social security number, a phone number, a credit card, a driver's license, any of these values here being able to show. And once again, that data, I certainly wouldn't want AI to be ingesting my social security number and make an identity theft to be even greater possibility than it already is. So just give you some idea of how we can do this. So basically, we could take the regex that we're using to find the PII, because we're finding patterns. And these are intelligent processes, by the way. It's not just looking for a 3-2-4. There's a lot of qualification to determine if it's a social security number. But we can take the PII, we can take the keywords, and all of those can feed back into the original, which is the classification. So we can use that metadata where we find, maybe it's the SharePoint site, maybe it's the OneDrive path, maybe it's the mailbox folder, whatever it might be, but we can use all that metadata and or the content to be able to make those decisions on, okay, I have found some data I do not want AI to have, and this is what I'm going to do with it. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you guys. Let me go back and see if I can get my mouse to work and come back over from the current slide. Maybe. There we are. And move on, Marcia. We're ready for any Q&A that we might have. Well, the Q, because I'll probably do the A. So yes, ready for that.
That's correct. No, it's great, Jeff. Good information. I'm also going to share the results.
Oh, awesome.
Hoping everybody can see that, but pretty much the majority answers to our poll question about how prepared. I don't know if you can see it, Jeff, but basically they're all in the middle or not. So
Right.
exploring, but no plans yet. So I think that's pretty typical. We did one of these polls in another session and it was still in the same pace. So appreciate
Awesome.
everybody. Yeah, thanks for doing that. Okay, but we do have a few questions from the crowd today. So let me kick those off to you.
Please.
The first one is, would you advise on performing route processing for AI readiness too?
Yeah, I really didn't talk about it in this, but that would be a good idea. And the main reason why is because not so much of, well, there could be sensitive data in the rot, but it's also it could be learning from things you don't want it to learn, not from a danger standpoint, just it could be misinformation or it's so old that it doesn't matter. I mean, I know I've heard of people saying that they're trying to counter the whole AI thing by saying, I love concrete sandwiches. And now AI is going, hey, we know favorite sandwiches are concrete. You know, they're trying to give that false information to that. So that kind of data, if you have things that are 20 years old, most likely, especially with the way the world has changed, it might not be accurate anymore. And it wouldn't be a bad plan to go through and do that cleanup if you can prior to the AI process.
Okay. Yep, I'd agree on that for sure. The other question is, you mentioned metadata earlier in your presentation, and the question was, can you use a combination of metadata and content checking?
Absolutely. So yeah, some of the things we can do with Discover is interrogate that metadata and basically make an and condition. So it's saying, okay, you have to be, I'm going to use Windows file shares again. You have to be in this folder and your extension is one of these types. And your content is this for me to say, this is the classification label. So I know to exclude it. So absolutely, you can use metadata and or content together.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Another question for you is about creating criteria for the exclusions or inclusions. Can you create different ones depending on the data and or location?
Yes, definitely. So yeah, the way that this works is you can have, in fact, we're working with a client, they have different departments. Their criteria is going to be different based upon the department. And you're also going to get the same thing when you go to different countries. You're going to have the privacy issues and whatever things you allowed to look for. So absolutely, you can go through and do that. I mean, anything within Gimmal Discover is fully customizable to make it fit what you need it to be. So we're not telling you how to do it. We're just giving you the tools so that you can configure it in any way you want and be aware of those different departments or anything that has any kind of segmentation to it so that you can make up different rules for different groups.
Okay, great. And last one, unless others posted in the area, but the last question is there a maximum and what is the maximum number of classification labels that can be created?
Well, there isn't a maximum. You can have as many as you want. I would probably encourage you to keep it less than 100 because that's just a lot of criteria to go through. We've seen people that have exceeded that and then they come back and say, I was way too myopic on, I identified, you know, when I was going through my classification, I have one file with this classification, I have 3 with this classification. It became almost too burdensome for that. If you need it, you need it, but we typically recommend less than 100, but you can make as many as you like.
Okay. That's it, Jeff. You're out of the hot seat.
Woohoo!
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Yeah, so that's bringing us towards the end of our session today. For those, one last thing to ask, you know, Gimmal's going to a lot of events coming up. So I posted a question, if you're going to be at any of these events, love to hear from it. A lot of times when we go to these conferences, we'll do a special event outside of the conference hours. So if you're there, we'd love to invite you. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Next week, thank you, Jeff. Good job. Next week, our session is for Gimmal Physical, and we'll be discussing importing data. So for those of interest in that, we hope to see you there. Otherwise, until next time, if you have any ideas for future sessions that you would like us to consider, please send those to me. And otherwise, we will talk to you in the near future. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.